Okay. All right. We're going to talk about causes of the Great Depression, and then if we have time, we're going to talk about Amelia Earhart, Charles Lindbergh, some of the people kind of famous in that time. And then hopefully tomorrow and Friday we will dive into the Great Depression. My guess is it might be Monday and Tuesday, but we'll see where the weather takes us. Okay? So, we're going to talk a little bit today about causes of the Great Depression. There was a lot of things. We think about the stock market crash. I mean, obviously that was pretty big. But that wasn't the only thing that caused the Great Depression. There was a number of things. And it was almost like the perfect storm. A lot of things are happening and coming together all at one time, unfortunately. And, it was just kind of bad timing for the world, if you would. And of course, the stock market crashes in 1929. And that was because of over-speculation, if you remember. That's when the stocks are bought. They're selling for more than they're actually worth.
That's what happened.
Yeah, it does. It happens. It happens periodically throughout history. Stocks are trading higher at more money than the company is actually worth sometimes. That's never good. We're supposed to have safety precautions in place. Doesn't always work, but that's the idea. Of course, people were buying stocks on credit. If you remember, they were going to the banks and borrowing money to invest in the stock market. That's never a good idea because you've got to pay that money back. And the stock market is a hit or miss. You might buy a stock and it might go up and make you money, or it might turn and go the other way and lose money. But most of the time, it's up and down. One day it'll be worth $10 more than you paid for it, and the next day it'll be worth $7 more than you paid for it, and then some days it's worth $1. It's less than you paid for it. So you just kind of got to ride it out and see. So borrowing the money to buy stock that's never a good idea.
Unless you like 3 years.
Yep. Now, farmers was also struggling at this time though, because in the 1920s before the Great Depression, they started getting new machinery, okay? And it makes it easier to grow crops. So they're actually growing more crops than we need. I mean, we joke today about how our government sometimes will pay farmers not to grow corn. Because if everybody in the Midwest grew corn would not be, it wouldn't be valuable. And the farmers who grew it couldn't make enough to pay their bills. Okay, because if everybody's growing corn, then corn is not going to sell for very much. Okay, so you got to limit the supplies. Not so much that you're hurting people, but not let it be so much that it kind of gets out of hand and it's just worth nothing. Okay, and that was happening because of overproduction. The prices drops, and the farmers couldn't make a profit. Okay. And of course, when the Great Depression hits, things got even worse for the farmers. In the Midwest, the drought starts, and it lasts until 1939. This thing lasts for close to 10 years. Okay? No rainfall, the soil turns to dust, the wind starts blowing, and we'll talk about the dust bowls and all that stuff a little later on. But you can't grow anything. I mean, the dust is so thick, it's actually choking animals to death. Things of that nature. This is bad. Any of you ever hear of a guy named John Deere? Yeah.
Built that tractor.
Built that tractor. First thing he built was a plow that actually had metal tills on it. Okay? So it could turn the soil better than the old wooden ones. Okay? So he kind of gets blamed because they're able to turn the soil so much better. It's a great invention because the more soil you can turn, the more fertile the soil is going to be, the better your crops are going to be. But then drought hits and all that topsoil turns to dust, and then it starts blowing it away. They're talking about how they found, topsoil from Kansas ended up in like North Carolina. It blew it halfway across the nation. Is that not amazing?
In the air too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, in the air. We hit the dust bowl. That is amazing. Okay. People was borrowing too much money. Brock, you need to quit throwing things at people, please. In the 1920s, and then trying to blame it on Sarah Grace. Can you believe that? Of all the people to try to blame it on, he's sitting back there pointing at Sarah Grace. All right. In the 1920s, there was a lot of new products available, like automobiles, washing machines, radios, and advertisements convinced people that don't wait, come on down and buy it now and just make monthly payments. So people started buying stuff on credit. Remember we talked about that. Before this, if you wanted something, you saved up the money and you went and you pretty basically paid cash for it. Okay? But the 1920s hit and suddenly you start buying stuff on credit. And so you have to make monthly payments. Well, that's great if you got an income coming in and can cover those bills. Okay? But when people start losing their jobs because the economy went bad, they can't pay the bills anymore. Okay? So then they start losing everything that they had bought on credit now gets repossessed, gets taken away from them because they don't own it.
But what if it was food?
Okay? You what?
What if it was like food and they already ate it? How come they
You don't
get
buy
free
food on
then?
credit. That's the one thing most people didn't buy on credit.
You don't pay for your food, Michael.
Yeah.
Shake
Do a surgery to take
It's kind of like your mom and dad. Okay? Today, Brock, you want to walk over and pick that up? Who threw that?
That's a window.
You want to go pick that up? It's kind of like your mom and dad probably has a mortgage on your home, okay? Because homes have gotten very expensive, we would have a hard time working and putting back enough money to just go out and pay cash for one. Okay, so they have to finance it, okay? And that's a great thing, because you can have a nice home, and your parents can finance it for 15 years, 30 years, 20 years, ever how long they feel comfortable financing it. But they have to pay interest on that money. Okay, they borrow the money from the bank. Let's say they borrow, we'll just make it simple. Let's say they borrowed $100,000. If they pay, if they,
That's a lot of soda.
well, it's really not for a house anymore. But $100,000 borrowed at, I don't know, 6% interest, which is actually lower than that now. Over a 30-year period, you pay back for that $100,000 house, you actually end up paying close to $200,000 or a little bit better for it because of the interest. So, so you can see it's not always, it's one of those necessary evils, unfortunately. Yes?
Speaking of interest, I saw this TikTok of this guy. He
interest, not
yes,
It's called
hold on. So
interest, not interest.
he asked for a $100,000 loan from the bank. He said he would put his $200,000 Ferrari, and he lived in New York. And so in 2 weeks, he paid back all of it, and he's like a rich guy, obviously. And he was like, "Why did you do that?" He just had money. And he was like, "We can't find parking for $10."
Yeah, like free parking for
Okay.
2 weeks for $100,000.
I don't.
I guess if you got that kind of money, you can do that. All right. Yes, Hart.
Like the land and houses right now are out of the roof. Like people want so much more for them, and it's not even like
They're not even worth that. Like I've seen houses, I'm like,
the
that
value.
shouldn't be worth that.
The
Yeah,
value's right here, and people are asking for this. Like,
yeah. Well, in my little neighborhood, which is not, it's a nice neighborhood, but it's not a neighborhood of $1 million homes. The one across from me just sold,
For 10
and no, it sold for $244,000. And I'm sitting here going, woo-hoo, because mine is bigger, my lot's bigger.
That means you can sell for a lot more.
I'm like, oh yeah, baby, because I'm
And
like,
that's how
all
much-
of a sudden now I'm getting excited about selling a house that I really have no interest in selling. Because I'm like, that's craziness. I'd have never thought you would have got that kind of money for that house.
Gotta get
All right,
some.
here we go. Here we go. So people was borrowing too much money, too many goods. Again, the economy was going great guns, so factories was putting on workers, turning out a lot of product, and then the economy goes south. They start having to let people go, laying them off, and now they've got an overabundance of product, so they're having to sell it cheaper. So they're starting to lose money now, and it was just that perfect storm. The banking systems, okay? One of the major factors in the Great Depression was the failure of the banking system. In the first few years of the Great Depression, over 10,000 banks failed. Okay, that means they shut their doors. That means people who had money in those banks lost it. Okay? Many people lost their life savings. Some people went from being rich to having nothing. The U.S. government, back in these days, the government did not insure your money. Now, you put your money in a bank, it's insured up to a certain amount.
Yeah.
I think it's like 200,000, 250,000, something like that.
It's like that other
okay.
bank keeping your money.
Where if a bank does fail or something, then your money is insured, you get your money back. But back in these days, we didn't have that. The movie It's a Wonderful Life, when everybody is coming to the savings and loan, they want to draw their money out, because what's happening is it's the Great Depression, and banks are failing, and banks just shut their doors. I mean, they wouldn't let people in. Didn't give them their money. Their money's just gone.
Need my money.
Okay, but what he was talking about, how it's not like, if you remember that scene in the movie where the character is talking about how hard, it's not like I have your money just back here on a shelf somewhere. You know, your money is in Ansley's house, and her money is in Julia's house, and that's how a banking system works. It's not like they just have an envelope back there with your name on it, and every time you deposit money, they put it in that envelope, and then when you need money, they come and get out of that envelope and give it back to you. They invest the money. Okay, they invest it in people and loan it out to people to buy houses and buy cars, and people pays interest, and that's how the bank makes money. Okay, now it doesn't mean that if you put your money in the bank and you go back the next day and go, hey, I need to draw some money, they gotta go, no, you ain't, no, you're gonna get your money. It might not be the exact dollar bill that you put in, but you'll get it back. Okay, so you don't have to be afraid of it. But it's not like that just sits on a shelf somewhere and waits for you to come back in there and get it. Okay? Now, unfortunately, the Great Depression was not just in the United States. It is worldwide. Okay? So the entire world economy was struggling at the time of the Great Depression. The U.S. had loaned its allies billions of dollars after World War I to help them rebuild. Okay? Well, now their economies are going south, so they're struggling, and guess what? They can't pay back all that money. Okay, so that hurts our economy even worse. Okay, so there wasn't just one thing.
It wasn't just one business.
Yeah, there wasn't just one big thing that happened. It was like I said, it was kind of like almost like the perfect storm. It's kind of like the storm when we get to World War II. We'll talk about that. It was almost like a perfect storm that allowed someone like a Hitler to rise to power. It was just everything just fell into place perfectly for that to happen. It seemed like. Okay, we're going to talk just a little bit about Amelia Earhart. Everybody probably knows who she was. She was kind of a tomboy growing up. She liked to play sports, liked to shoot rifles, things of that nature. She at one point in time thought she might like to be a mechanic, but she instead went to school and learned to be a nurse's aide, where then during World War I, she actually treated wounded soldiers and things. Then she thought, well, maybe she would like to go back into the medical. That's when she decided maybe she wanted to be a mechanic. And a little bit after of going to school for that, she decided maybe maybe I do want to get back into the medical field. And she ends up in medical research, things of that nature. And she and her dad goes to a air show out in California, and she gets to take her first flight in a plane, and that's when she knew she wanted to fly. Yes.
Did you hear that they might have found Amelia Earhart's plane?
I read that the other day.
Yeah, it like
Yeah.
drifted somewhere like
Yeah.
way off the coast or something.
Yeah, I read that the other day. Yeah, they think, once again, they might have found.
There's probably a ton of planes in
Yeah.
the ocean.
So, anyway. But she, in 1928, she's invited to take part in a historic flight across the Atlantic. She flies with two other people, a pilot and a co-pilot. She's the navigator, okay? But she is the first woman to actually make a flight across the Atlantic. But she wasn't satisfied with that. She wanted to make the same trip across the Atlantic Ocean that Charles Lindbergh had made. He was the first guy to actually fly nonstop by himself. And she wanted to make that flight. And she took off in Harbor Grace, Newfoundland, aboard a bright red single-engine Lockheed airplane. And the flight, was, of course, was going to be very dangerous. There was bad weather, thick clouds. Often her windshield and wings were covered in ice. 14 hours later, she had crossed over the Atlantic Ocean, but she had to cut her flight short, and she ended up landing in a cow pasture in Ireland.
Oh, I remember that.
Did the cows survive?
Amelia continued to fly over the next several years. She broke a number of records for women especially. And then she became the most famous woman pilot in the world, but she still wasn't satisfied. She wanted to be the first woman to fly around the world. And on June 1st, 1937, she and a navigator took off from Miami, Florida. They flew a number of flights, eventually getting all the way across Africa and Asia to New Guinea in the South Pacific. And on July the 2nd, they took off from New Guinea to fly to Howland Island in the Pacific Ocean, and that was when they disappeared. And that's when the mystery of Amelia Earhart starts. The government searched for her for several weeks, could never find any trace of her plane, of her. Might have been searching in the wrong area. No one knows. And you hear all kinds of theories. You know, the Japanese shot her down and captured her because it was, getting close to the beginning of World War II. And Hart said, and I saw it the other day, where they think once again they might have found something that belonged to Amelia Earhart.
But in World War II, there's
Yeah,
so many
but they
planes
just,
that went down.
that's it. But they're not 100% sure. So we're not really 100% sure what happened to her. You'll read all kinds of theories that might have, that could have happened, but no one's 100% sure.
The navigator tied her to the plane.
Might have, who knows. Charles Lindbergh,
Navigator shot her in the plane.
did you know that if all y'all start talking at one time, I have no idea what any of you said? Leo,
The Japanese shot her down and captured her. That makes sense, really.
it does make sense.
But
I think navigator.
The article that Art's talking about talks about how they think they have proof that she actually survived the crash and probably lived several years
Yeah.
on this island. But how they have that, how they piece that
It's hard
together.
to
Then
predict.
why don't you take
Yeah.
another flight? Because
So
How did
Yes.
they search for
I
a
read
reason
that
on
the
that
first
final?
airplane she actually bought, it was yellow and
yeah,
and
it's
she
called a
called it
canary. Yep, called it the canary. It sure
I
did.
think
All right.
that the navigator.
Now, Charles Lindbergh, we'll hit on him real quick. He dreamed about being a pilot. After 2 years of college at the University of Wisconsin, he quit to take a job as an airplane mechanic. He took flying lessons, began flying planes as a barnstormer. That's the guys who goes out and does tricks at air shows and things. In 1924, he joined the Army Air Service, where he actually received some formal training as a pilot. And of course, then, he is the guy that flies on May 30th, 1927. Charles took off from New York aboard his plane, the Spirit of St. Louis. It was named that because he got a bunch of guys, businessmen from St. Louis to build the plane, to put the money up to build the plane. And this is a plane that he designed. This is a different type of airplane. Because the reason that people couldn't fly across the Atlantic and all that stuff, fuel. These are small planes. A lot of them were double engine, so they burned more fuel, but they didn't hold that much fuel. So he actually designs this plane. It's a little bit bigger. It holds 425 gallons of fuel. It's a single engine.
It's pretty good.
He is so cramped that he cannot straighten his legs out
Yeah.
for the entire 33.5-hour flight.
Oh, imagine how weird it felt to walk.
Okay? Yeah, I can imagine when he finally lands, he probably can't get out of the plane.
Probably
His legs are
won't.
probably asleep.
I would have
When he
broke the window.
Yeah.
I would have broke the window and jumped out of that thing.
He has to stay awake the entire 33.5 hours. I read where he wrote that he would nod off and that he would wake up
Yeah, like
just in a dive going down, but he would wake up in time to pull back. But he's having to try to navigate by the stars at some point in time, just a compass, because he doesn't have all this fancy equipment or anything.
He doesn't have radar.
That would be it. Didn't have radar, so that would have been a tough
It's kind of
flight.
like a trucker who has to stop every now and then because they can't drive for so long without sleeping.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like that's where a lot of wrecks come from. They drive for too long.
All right. Hope y'all enjoyed that just a little bit. No questions or anything. That was just on a class discussion.